Hi there folks, Lee Farnell here from Leading Your Best Life. Boy, oh boy, what did I start? You know, as people say, there are three things you shouldn't be talking about, sex, politics and religion. But of course, we're going through this campaign now, the last 5 weeks of the yes or no campaign. Certainly it's the yes campaign in regard to the referendum and the Indigenous rights recognition and how the recognition occurs in the Constitution and how that actually works in terms of functional. Anyway, this is all about this. Boy, I started as something. Let me share it with you. Well, I thought I'd share this with you because I've just been over the net last few days. I think it was, what day was it? On my Facebook wall, 4 days ago. 4 days ago, I put up this post. There's a cartoon of two posters. One poster says, "If you don't know, vote no," which is essentially what the No campaign and Peter Dutton and the Liberals have been saying. And then the other poster says, "If you don't know, find out. It's not that hard." And the person in the poster says, "I think I'll go with option B, which is if you don't know, find out." I just say, excellent point. Well, there's been 57 comments since I put that up. Let me read them because I just thought I've just been putting so much time answering these people that I need to make comment. Now, I won't use their full name, but the guy called Grant says, "Please explain how The Voice will provide one practical solution to some of the Indigenous problems that all have previously failed at, including billions and billions spent consulting with the Indigenous, and I would love to support it." Okay, so there's 13 replies. I say, Grant, read the Kerry O'Brien Thomas Mayo book. It's free on Audible. There are case studies in there on health, justice and education where Aboriginal people are involved, or when Aboriginal people are involved in shaping policy and how programs are delivered, the outcomes are proven to be far better than if they're designed in Canberra by non-Indigenous bureaucrats who are most likely good-hearted, nice people, but more interested in towing the government line than listening to Aboriginal leaders and pushing a different agenda back up the pyramid. What do they say? Shit travels downhill, but not back uphill. There are also tons of documents on the various websites that I've posted on my page to make it easy to research. I've also put up a recent podcast which highlights great successes, one of which is in the great work being done in the southwest of WA. And I literally put up, again, these guys are forcing me to do more and more research to go, okay, where's the data here? What exists, rather than me just have an opinion. There's a fantastic fact sheet on the treaty down in the southwest of WA. This is a document from 2022, and I love what some of the people in here have said. Noongar elder Elizabeth Hayden, "My heart is weeping with joy. We live with hope because we've been knocked from pillar to post for generations. We've always lived in hope that we could get to the point of being acknowledged as the first people of this nation. The past is the past, but we need to move forward to a better future." Premier Colin Barnett said, "This is an extraordinary act of self-determination by Aboriginal people and provides them with a real opportunity for independence." And then Glenn Kelly, CEO of the Southwest Aboriginal Land and Sea Council and Noongar lead negotiator, says, "The settlement, this treaty, will have a massive and revitalising effect on Noongar people and culture." And I particularly like the last piece here, which says, "The Noongar settlement also has an important consequence for future treaty debates. In registering the comprehensive political agreement as 6 individual land use agreements, the Noongar agreement shows that treaties can be achieved in a manner consistent with Australia's existing public legal system. The concerns of people like John Howard and Tony Abbott, now Peter Dutton, can safely be put to one side. Treaty is achievable in Australia." And you guys who know, who've looked at the Uluru Statement from the Heart, the voice is step one. That is not only to have recognition, but a functional recognition. It's like, okay, so we get a token recognition. Okay, we put in the Constitution, Aboriginals are the first people. Great. But what does that actually mean? How's it actually going to improve their situation? Well, What we do then is give them a voice, a seat at the table when decisions are being made about Aboriginal matters, whether it be education, justice, health, roads, or whatever is affecting them at that point in time. So let me go back to here. Grant comes back to me. Or maybe the government should not reverse policies that have been proven to work, but do it for political reasons. Maybe they could listen to the very well-represented Indigenous politicians on both sides of Parliament. I politely ask again, my friend, give me one practical way the voice, who in my opinion will be loaded for political purposes, can give one better outcome than one of the other 10,000s of other Indigenous individuals already charged to do so. Please see my attachment. He then puts in a piece out of The Australian which says something to the effect of, we already have the voice, 3,278 Aboriginal corporations, 243 native title bodies, 48 land councils, 35 regional councils, 122 plus Aboriginal agencies, 3 advisory bodies, 145 health organisations, 11 Indigenous federal MPs, 12 culturally important Indigenous days. Taxpayers give $33 billion annually for 984,000 people, 3.8% of the population. Expenditure per person in 2012-13 was $43,000, $449 on Indigenous Australian law compared to $20,000 on other Australians, a ratio of 2.8 or 2.08 to 1, an increase from 1. So Australian taxpayers spend at least $100 million a day on direct support for Indigenous Australians every year, or $39.5 billion on direct government expenditure every single year. The figures are based on the 2017 Indigenous Expenditure Report produced by the Productivity Commission. Source Professor Matthew Bennett, etc., spokesman for. So, like, great, good-o. So I then said, then he goes further. I was referencing the welfare card that the Indigenous elders told Labor not to reverse, but the Labor politicians in Canberra did it anyway. They refused to listen to the Indigenous Senator Jacinta Price, who lives and breathes for the best outcomes for her local people, but she also wants the best for all Australians. I truly believe she will lead this country one day for all Australians. I think people are getting sick of feel-good politics that you are suggesting, IMHO, in my humble opinion. I go, Grant, firstly, because I Googled Senator Jacinta Price just to see what people are saying about her, and immediately I come up with an article from the Northern Territory Aboriginal leaders. You click on the article, I put the link in there. This is what it says. Central Land Council leaders say Jacinta Price needs to stop pretending we are her people. It talks of 90 leaders of the powerful Central Land Council. Now, this article is 20th of April 2023, representing dozens of remote communities in Central Australia, have issued an extraordinary joint statement rejecting the views of the Northern Territory Senator Jacinta Price, saying she needs to stop pretending we are a people. These 90 members, elected by their communities to sit on the council, represent 24,000 Aboriginal people across 777,000 square miles and represent more than 15 different language groups in Central Australia. The delegates said Price neither speaks for them nor listens to them. And it goes on. It's in the Guardian, so you can find it. We have many good men and women who are trying hard to make our communities better places, who are desperate to be heard, and Senator Price's divisive approach isn't helping. It goes on and on and on. She talks about child assault and so on, and they're saying, well, if you have proof of it, you should be going to the police. CLC members said these claims were hurtful and untrue. Our kids are the apples of our eyes, said one of the representatives, Williams. We are not abusers. We love our children. We'd like to know where she got her information from. It's mandatory to report such evidence to the authorities. Lamunjuru community leader and Warlpiri editor Valerie Patterson said Price was misrepresenting the support for the voice in the remote communities. I'm a Warlpiri woman and I'll vote yes because I believe that having the right to be heard by the Parliament and the government will open a door for our children. Senator Price should support us, not tell lies about us. Price declined to comment. So I say to Grant, feel-good politics, and people are sick of whatever that means. Which people? Sounds like you're sick of whatever feel-good politics is. So are you saying you would rather feel bad politics, politics where people feel bad? What are you saying? I also make the point then, when the elected members of the Aboriginal community speak with such consensus, I would suggest Senator Jacinta Price is not speaking on their behalf or with their best interest and lives and families at heart. Quote from the article, as I just said, CLC's 90 members elected across their communities to sit in the council, which I've just said. The delegate said Price neither speaks for them or listens to them. I said, in a statement from the meeting this week, council, members of the community said, cultural leaders and senior cultural men and women speak for their communities who elected them. I don't think Senator Price will be around in politics for too long, let alone the PM you hope for. He then says, yes, of course there'll be lands councils who are basically paid for by the government, and she wants to stop the handouts because it is achieving nothing, zero. In fact, the handouts are what half the problem is. She also is not the only person at the N2 who disagrees with the voice. Just one example, and I'm acknowledging she is on the wrong side of politics to be listened to by the left-leading media. I say issues like the welfare card, child protection, crime and justice, health and education, because he's going to give me one issue that it would help, all will improve when elected representatives are at the table. The Productivity Commission report with all those numbers in it do not have one organisation that systematically sits to advise senior policy makers and implementers of policy. I said the Australian article stating that 3,278 there are 3,278 Aboriginal corporations. So what? At the 30th of June this year, or last year, 2020, there were 3,521 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander corporations registered under the CATSI Act, including 243 registered native title bodies corporate. Taking that line of thought, how many corporations are there in Australia? There are approximately 1,795 large corporate groups with more than 7,000 income tax reporting entities in Australia. This represents over 33,000 active companies. So do all 33,000 companies have direct line to government to sit at the table of company policy decision making? Of course not. The 3,278 Aboriginal corporations number is just another red herring, furphy and smokescreen. It is irrelevant. Let's all aim for the very best outcome for a high-functioning, self-determining, self-sufficient First Nations people in Australia, where all Australians are proud of their relationship with our First Nations people and their positive contribution to the Australian culture, tourism, education and economy. If that is feel-good politics, so be it. Oh, look what Grant says. Lee, you are that far left, you are laying down. Feel-good politics is all this is. Indigenous have been part of every conversation that involves them, and rightfully so. So you're saying because there is a voice, we'll all start to listen? You have to be kidding. Give me one example of how it will help and how it can't be done now because there's no voice. The point about laying down and left kind of got me. So I said, Grant, my whole life has been spent helping business people sell more and make more money and achieve. I'm committed to helping my fellow humans be as good as they possibly can be. I do not believe in central ownership or central planning. I believe in decentralisation, so I am not that far left I am laying down. Thank you very much. Grant says, okay, fair enough, but the current polls suggest, this is Grant's talking, the current polls suggest that this will not get up, and that's because people can't see how it will help. And so I am, like the growing group of people, cannot see how it will. I truly want the best for Indigenous people, but also all Australians. Saying it will does not mean it will. To enshrine this in the Constitution without knowing the full details would be insane, in my humble opinion. You can see this is getting on and on, but I said, listen, Grant, this is me. We can play keyboard tennis back and forwards for the next 6 weeks, but I doubt it will achieve too much. You clearly have made up your mind. Taking your point about the voice getting us all to listen is not the purpose of the voice. It's to get senior politicians who are making decisions about policy and where to spend or not spend money, and senior public service, government executive, to at least hear and consider the Aboriginal point of view. The Aborigines are saying that they are rarely sitting with the PM or ministers as a representative group, that their opinions are filtered by senior public servants, that their message is diluted, filtered and weakened by this process. It reminds me of the time I was running a business improvement program at the City of Bayswater here in Perth, West Australia, and I wanted councillors and senior managers to hear what their customers, the ratepayers, were saying about their service. I had a choice. Do I do a survey of ratepayers, then present a report, or do I have ratepayers come into the room and share their stories and what they wanted? I chose the latter because I wanted the councillors to have a visceral experience of the feedback. We know, psychologically, that emotion gets people into motion. So when an ex-Z force, which was the commando force in the Second World War, went behind enemy lines in New Guinea, when an ex-Z force legend, hero of Australia, spoke of the fear he and his wife had as they sat in their retirement village with people literally breaking in while they, as 80-year-olds, sat and watched TV, this hero was not safe in his own house. And we heard similar stories from other aged ratepayers. The City of Bayswater were the first to hire private security firms to patrol retirement homes to make old people feel safer. I'm of the firm conviction that proximity, having people in the same room, hearing and feeling the stories firsthand, change minds and change priorities for the better. I didn't make the note, but that's called empathy. Empathy, feeling how the other person's feeling. This is what I believe will be a major benefit of the voice. Same room, elected representatives with data and stories, bringing senior politicians and senior government executive together on a regular basis, working in a cooperative partnership, working in cooperation, in partnership, not as parent-child, not as protector-noble savage relationships, but a true partnership relationship, and both understanding each other's positions way, way better. So it becomes a working partnership, not a noble savage with cap in hand. It is not so much as us starting to listen, although I think that will be a side benefit. It is the decision makers listening and spending with more precision and less wastage. And the Aborigines being even more accountable, as Paul Kelly says in his piece, with agency comes accountability. With agency comes accountability. We give you responsibility, you now become accountable for the success of the decisions that are made. With agency comes accountability. So in the Aboriginals being more accountable for and making sure that what they ask for actually happens. The other point about details are that, one, there is already quite a bit of detail around what is proposed. You can see the guidelines on the Voice website, the Vote Yes website, a whole range of places, including my page. There's a whole lot of guidelines, the 7 principles, how people are going to be elected or proposed anyway, and Parliament can decide yes or no or change it or whatever. Point 2, just as in the tax clause and the defence clause of the Constitution, the details are worked out and agreed on by the Parliament of the day, which, if it's working, the detail stays the same or is increased, and if it's not working, can be adjusted, tailored, changed or improved. You don't want the detail in the Constitution because if the detail needs changing, you don't need to be coming back to a referendum every time you need to change the detail. You want Parliament to be able to vote and change things much quicker and easier and more adaptably, just like the tax or health or education or defence. If you're at war, you certainly want to be able to, bring in conscription or whatever happens to be the case. I thank you for challenging me, as this forces me to think more and become more articulate in my views, become even deeper and more precisely. I'll read that again. I thank you for challenging me, as it forces me to think more and articulate my views even deeper and more precisely. And to not waste my writings, I can post them elsewhere and share them and record another podcast on the topic to help those who are undecided. We both love Australia, clearly, and we both want the best for our children and grandchildren. And we want our children and grandchildren to be proud of our country's relationship with our First Nations people. And we certainly want Australia to be proud of how some of our First Nations people in 30 years from now are not living below third world conditions like today. All the best. I'm exhausted by it all. That's where oh my God, that's where this started from a day ago when I said, I realise that many who have worked in remote communities in regional WA and have seen the plight and the present situation of present-day Aborigines there see little or no hope. And they see that what has gone on for the past 50 or 100 or 200 years and the money spent has not worked. I can see why they would say, no matter what happens, nothing will change. Yet, we have to see what is possible. If we just look at the mud, it's hard to believe that a lotus flower can grow from this environment. But that is exactly what we have to do. Call me naive, call me an optimist, call me a dreamer, but the good news is there are hundreds of thousands of other dreamers and optimists out there too, including many Indigenous elders and leaders who believe in a better day, a brighter day, with healthy, happy, educated, law-abiding, proud First Nations people living in two worlds, in partnership with everyone in Australia. It is possible. It reminds me of the Robert F. Kennedy quote, "Some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream of things that never were and say, why not? Why not?" Seneca. It's not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It's because we do not dare that things are difficult. A guy called Mark says to me, "Hey Lee, yes just seems to me and my family it's the right thing to do. What's been done so far has not worked for First Australia." A guy called Mark says, "I tried, but I can't find out what the voice will cost per annum and how will participants be elected. Will all other Indigenous advisory groups remain?" Well, that's the detail that Parliament can decide on. So I think I said here, Mark, often the other groups are program delivery groups, in other words, what he considers advisory groups, which the voice is not. So program delivery groups, of course, have got to stay the same because the voice is an advisory group. Again, these are practical details that Parliament can and will work out in parallel with the voice. It's a bit like asking, let's find out how much it's going to cost to run the tax department before you find out how wide the scope of the tax department is. The point is, the Parliament of the day can expand or contract the size and scope based on the value and impact the voice is having. The Constitution gives Aboriginals recognition, a function and a structure rather than just symbolic words, but no structure to actually add value and make a positive difference to the plight of Aboriginal people. ATSIC was the previously elected voice, but now, 20 years later, Amanda Vanston, as the minister at the time, said getting rid of ATSIC was a mistake. And it goes on, folks, it goes on. People challenging and so on and so on. Want to find out more, do touch base. As I said to one of my mates, Wayne, I said, I think only Aboriginal people have the answers. Self-determination versus Canberra-based. Because Wayne says to me, sorry, but I can't share your optimism whether the voice is mandated or not. Realistically, what services can be offered to remote communities regardless of whether they are Indigenous or homesteads? Towns like Meekatharra, Kew, Fitzroy Crossing, Walloona, Laverton, Halls Creek and Warburton are substantial settlements compared to the vast number of tiny communities, and yet they only have a servo which often doubles as a supermarket and usually a medical centre. Where are the job opportunities? How will education benefit a proud Yamatji boy who is raised and stays in Meekatharra? I said, Wayne, I think only Aboriginal people have the answers. Self-determination versus Canberra-based determination. He says it's hard to get your head around how remote and isolated these communities are, which I said, which is why it's best local people, regional people, solve or have input into solving those problems, coming from their paradigms, not ours. And Cole, my mate, talks about, mate, in our constitution, it makes no mention of how many people are in any armed forces, which is answering the question about how much is it going to cost and so on and so on. Cole says, it makes no mention of how many people are in any armed forces raised by the Commonwealth, nor does it stipulate at what cost those forces may be raised. This is all put in the hands of Parliament. In most cases, the Constitution only gives direction and rarely gives prescriptive detail. This is how it should be. This allows the people to give meat to the bones, so to speak. Mark says, are there not other Indigenous groups that currently advise Parliament or advise their Indigenous parliamentarians? I make the point. 1, the Indigenous parliamentarians come from a range of parties, hence are tied to party policy and party politics. If they don't have the clout, they are hardly listened to, hence why the voice is independent of politics, political parties. 2, because Aboriginals make up only 3% of the population, historically their voices, especially those from land corporations or other Aboriginal bodies, are so soft and politically insignificant, the louder voices with the bigger money and the bigger numbers, e.g. lobby groups and think tanks, get the ears and the time of the senior politicians, which I am sure you are aware of. The voice gives the 3% a chance to be heard and have input into policies and decisions that affect them. Aboriginals, and I said ATSI, Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders, because I get sick of typing the same thing over and over again, says the one-size-fits-all, one blanket covering all of the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders decision-making, the one blanket decision-making that comes out of Canberra, A, doesn't work, B, wastes money, C, often does more harm than good. Believe it or not, the elders in each community need to get back power. The culture and the traditions need to work in partnership to bring order and justice back to the regional centres. John Howard bringing in the military, centralist white man decision-making, has been shown to have done way more damage than good. Self-determination and self-management and self-responsibility are the keys, and that can only come when the local communities can take back power and pride in their own decision-making. The voice is what they've asked for, so we should give it to them. Vote yes, but of course it's up to you. You decide. Simon says to Mark, that will be the legislation to be drafted in consultation with stakeholders, tabled in Parliament for all to scrutinise, debated, redebated in the Senate, likely parts sent to the Senate subcommittee, retabled in both houses and ultimately voted on. It's called government, Mark, and it happens every day. This is no different. Wayne, my mate, says, isn't the greatest form of self-determination is choosing to live in some of the most remote and inhospitable parts of Australia where there are no services or hope of economic development? I say to my good mate Wayne, these people are tribal people attached to the land they were born in. They are not job-seeking nomads. They have spiritual, religious attachments to land and mob, family. Then when you disempower, disable them with 200 years of emasculation and colonial rule, you have intergenerational disempowerment, intergenerational trauma. To think that a remote community person can just wake up one morning and say, you know what, I think I'll get in my car, go to the airport, fly down to Melbourne and get myself a good job, in my opinion, is not only overlaying our values on theirs, but assuming they have all the resources, all the brain power, and when I say brain power, I mean mental health capability, self-determination, etc., that you or I might hope to have. If you are an intergenerational, clinically depressed, and there are many steps before you get to that, not only that, it becomes the challenge of what and how do these people support themselves living on or off the land. Wayne says to me, the fact that remote living Indigenous are not job ready is not a criticism, but their choice to remain in their homelands means closing the gap in most areas is unrealistic. Anyone living in a remote area of Australia is going to be disadvantaged compared to individuals living in a capital centre. Mining companies do not engage in FIFO by choice, but as a result of being unable to get employees to reside in remote locations. Jackaroos on remote properties rely on the same flying doctor service as the adjoining Indigenous community. The more remote anyone chooses to live, the greater the social and economic disadvantage. I said to Wayne, and that's clearly part of the challenge, but that's no reason not to vote yes. Wayne says, correct, but I just can't see the Voice being any more representative than ATSIC or any advisory body. Tony says, good advice to give Elbow. Then he might be able to tell us. Simon says, Tony, tell you what, Tony? What would you like to know? There's oodles of answers available. What's the question? Well, it's here. Could not be more simple or less threatening. Here it is. Tony says, what is being proposed is a major change to our constitution, which we are being sold on the notion that the cause of disadvantage to some Indigenous people is the absence of a body to advise government. Here is my question. Where is the overwhelming evidence that the cause of Indigenous disadvantage is directly resulting from the lack of Indigenous body to advise government? Because I have been working with Indigenous communities and in Central Australia for most of my adult life, and I can tell you what the causes are, and they have absolutely nothing to do with a lack of a body to advise government. Simon answers Tony and says, firstly, I'd suggest that your premise is wrong. The proposed change is of itself relatively uncontroversial and benign, simply an advisory body. It has no special or magical power, in fact none at all. Its only significant attribute is that it can't be abolished as successive white governments have done over the years. That said, its makeup, governance, operating processes and everything else will be legislated by government and can be changed as often as any government may choose. They can choose to ignore it if they want. Will it present some magic resolution of the morass of failure, well-intentioned, patriarchal, genocidal, altruistic or expensive solutions thrown at the issue over a couple of 100 years? Absolutely not. And not one person behind the Uluru Statement or the Yes campaign would suggest this. Where you draw your conclusion from is your business, but it ain't from the authors or the promoters of the concept. It's very simply, but deeply considered. It is a very simple but deeply considered first step on a multi-generational path to address multi-generational historic failures. All we are being asked to approve is the most considered, thoroughly optimistic, representative proposal actually put forward by Indigenous people to address their lived experience, not yours or my diligent but white imposed solutions. Beautifully written, Simon. I say that actually. Excellent summation. Thanks for writing. The buttons this is pushing are quite incredible. Simon says, I perfectly understand. We all need to share the load and be as patient and as measured as we can. That is all we can do. But yes, it is dangerously fraying my soul. Yes, and I say, yes, Simon, I've already begun letting go of some of the people from my wall, and I may do the same with others. They can go and write on their walls, and I will on mine. I think we can still do that in democracy, can't we? He says, if our MSN still lets us have one. I'm not quite sure if he means by MSN. And then so Paul sends me this thing about vote of no confidence. It's a poster talking about, you wouldn't sign a contract with a builder who said, here's our glossy brochure, isn't it sweet, all on one page, and don't worry about the details or what's in the contract. We've decided to pretend that doesn't exist. We'll give you the terms and conditions, house plans and price when we've decided what we think you need. Now just sign here. Like, what a load of shit. Michael says it's been a complete PR disaster. You could have run it for, say, 2 years, then had a referendum to enshrine it in the Constitution. That may be true, Michael. I don't know why it didn't, but the fact is we got what we got. They had no idea people would run such a huge disinformation campaign against it. It's such a simple, no opinion necessary thing, confers no legal rights whatsoever, and makes no changes. Could even be a 65-35 the way it's going. I saw a poll saying that only 13% of people over 60 supported it, with another 50% undecided and 37% being against it. In the 18 to 34 range, 45% support and 24% undecided, 31% against. Anyway, it goes on and on. What's it say here? And Michael says, nobody predicted that the mining companies would step in with such a huge disinformation campaign. The whole thing is ridiculously simple and unthreatening. No more rights than the Maori in New Zealand have had since 1840. That would have made for a better question, actually. Do you think that the Indigenous people of Australia should have the same rights and recognition as the Maori in New Zealand were given in the 1840 Treaty of Waitangi? Now, that would be an interesting question. Oh, yes, Paul writes to me 2 days ago. So, Lee, being a business consultant coach, if a large corporation hired you to fix their HR issues and they already had 43 committees formed for years to resolve the issues, you'd advise them to form another overarching committee? Or would you maybe suggest that they look at why the existing committees haven't been made accountable and or fixed the problem? And someone else, Annette, says, exactly, Paul, exactly. I say, hey, Paul, I would ask their frontline people what is exactly going on in the organisation, what was it like at the front line, and what does the front line actually think needs to be done, which is exactly what happened here with the Aboriginal people, 1,200 elected representatives across 12 forums, and a non-token functioning representation in the Constitution is what the front line had asked for. That's right, because they wanted a functional representation, not just a token representation in the Constitution. From there, they can then advise government on what they suggest the changes in terms of the other bodies, what should be changed. In other words, the government can either take and act on the advice or not. But asking the customer, asking the front line is where I'd start. Asking the customer and asking the front line, it's where I'd start with any organisation, which is what this referendum process, started back in 2015 by Malcolm Turnbull, has been. I've been involved in change management, change leadership and change facilitation now for 40 years. Getting the leader's perspective is one thing, but I've found over the years that the view from the 30th floor executive suite is often very different to the front line and the customer experience, which, by the way, is why the Japanese have what they call a Genko walk, I think it's called, where you actually go to where the work is done, go to where the pain is, go to the front line. Gemba walks. That's what the Japanese call it. The voice will bring unpalatable views to the executive suite. But those views have to be heard and acted on if Australia is not only serious about closing the gap, but being fair, compassionate and loving of our First Nations people, and walking on this journey to a better future, which is what they asked us to do in the Uluru Statement. Your vote is your choice, Paul. My hope is that the vast majority of Australians agree to vote yes. Richard comes in and goes, I think you'll find this as a UN agenda using the Australian Aboriginal problem as a Trojan horse to implement something that could dramatically change the way we all live our lives. I don't think it'll do anything to help Uncle Billy and Auntie Sheila and their 6 kids at Fitzroy Crossing or any long grasses at Ludmilla Reserve Darwin. We know what the problem is. It's alcohol and lack of education. There are over 1,000 taxpayer-funded Aboriginal departments already. Maybe audit them to start with. it's a huge no vote from me. And then he puts up an article from Paul Murray in the West Australian titled "Sovereignty and Treaty are at the heart of the voice. Attempts to shut down this debate do the nation a disservice." And he goes on. And he says, worth a read. I said to Richard, if you're up to being challenged, show data or proof of how you see the UN using the voice as a Trojan horse. Australia signed up to a UN declaration on fair treatment of First Nations people, as it worked out, years ago. This is hardly a Trojan horse, but I will read Paul Murray's article, then reply. I then come back to him. You can see I've put a lot of time into this. I should be doing other things, I think, but I just feel so passionate and I'm trying to help people. Boy, oh boy, there's a lot I've written, isn't there? The Paul Murray article, in his opinion, are half-baked accusations. The Paul Murray article is his opinion and half-baked accusations. 1, the 26 pages he refers to are background documents and minutes showing various views and ideas that were presented in meetings leading up to the one final page of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. 2, corporate donations are not new. Companies have been donating to causes that they think are worthwhile for years. Gina Reinhardt donates to WA Swimming. Is that underhand corruption or just doing what they think is right and a good thing to do? 3, this is not a Labor cause. It was started by the Liberals under Malcolm Turnbull as PM back in 2015. The Liberals just don't want to be seen supporting something Albanese is committed to on election night. Dutton, being a new opposition leader, is doing his best to appear tough and decisive. Plus, Johnny Howard would hate the Yes campaign to get up because it is a slap in the face to his A, getting rid of ATSIC, B, not apologising to the stolen generation, C, proving his calling the military in was a Canberra-based non-consultative white man knows best policy that the very own Menzies Research Institute says did far more damage than it did good. The world is watching. Will Australians actually give First Nations people a seat at the table, where they won't have a vote, won't have a veto, just a voice advising where they haven't had a voice before? 4, no, the various Aboriginal corporations do not have seats at the table. They are so far down the listening line that 1,200 elected representatives of the Indigenous people from around Australia say a body has to be created that is put into the Constitution so that another John Howard doesn't crush them out of existence if and when they disagree with government policies that don't work for Aboriginal people. Howard crushed the dissenting voice so that he could stay in power and look good and do his best to beat Menzies' record as the longest-serving Prime Minister. The resistance in the Liberal Party was and still is driven by the great John Howard and his cronies. Oh boy, I think that's it. I'm exhausted, but the point is, there's a lot of data in there with both yes and no people putting their points of view forward. You can choose. I say vote yes. It's the right thing to do. It's the fair thing to do. When a former Chief Justice of the High Court says absolutely minimal, if not no risk to this constitutionally in terms of land rights, these people with the farmers going, oh, my backyards will go. Your backyards are safe, boys. Your backyards and your farms are safe. Your superannuation funds are safe. Thomas Mayo was saying it just this week. Guys, we just want to sit at the table. Your farms are safe. Your super's safe. We don't want your backyard. So stop the fear, stop the uncertainty, and stop the divisiveness. Vote yes, October 14. Throw mud at me if you like, folks. Let democracy do its job. Let the collective brain power make the choice. Vote yes. I'm Lee Farnell. Thanks for listening. If you have to all of this, you're a superstar. We both love Australia. Remember that.